Are you feeling any vibrations or hearing any crazy noises when you hit the brakes in your 986 Boxster? If you are, it might be time for new pads and rotors. And today, we're going to show you how to do the front and rear brakes on your 986 Boxster. First, we're going to start off by removing the old pads. That will require us to take the pad wear sensor out, which we will be replacing. And then we can lift the caliper out, and then we'll undo the rotor screw to remove that and install our new brake setup. So first we'll pull this brake pad sensor out of where it sits. Should just pull straight out. There's a little spring clip holding it in. Now on the spring clamp itself, the sensor is routed under this little tab to keep it out of the way. You should be able to just lift this up and out. Here's the sensor for the rear pad. Also just lift out. There is a plastic retainer holding the sensor wire into place with the hard brake line. That just has a tab here you want to pull up. There's the section here, keep this out. The last thing we need to do here is pull up on this metal clip, which is holding the connector to the wiring harness. This just feeds up. Now you can pull the connection straight down and remove the old sensor. To avoid damaging this hard brake line when we remove the caliper, we're gonna undo the 10mm bolt holding this bracket that houses the brake line connections. So that way we can move the whole caliper out of the way and hang it up with the caliper hanger, and then we can remove the rotor. To remove the pads, we're gonna start by pulling this spring clip out so we can drive out this pin, so we can then pull the hardware and then finally the pads. We'll just need needle nose pliers to pull this little spring clip outward. Now we've got this long 1/4" drive punch, and we can start from the outside of the caliper with a hammer, and these should just tap out easily. Now we've got a 10mm hex socket on a 3/8" ratchet, so we can undo the two bolts here and then lift the caliper off and hang it out of the way. Move the caliper to the side. One thing to note on these Porsche calipers up front, when you get this off and pull the pad out, these have vibration dampers that stick to the back of the pad and fit inside the caliper pistons. So this is to cut down on brake noise and give you a better pedal feel, because these are counterweighted. So it just gives a little bit more heft to the brake pads, which you'll definitely feel in the brake pedal. So it is recommended you replace these every time because they are adhesive and they're stuck to the back of the pad. For demonstration purposes, we will reuse ours, but definitely replace these. There we are. Now we can work on removing the rotor. There's two Phillips screws holding the rotor to the knuckle. You more than likely are going to need an impact screwdriver to get these loose, depending on how long these have been on and how tight the last person put these on. These really are only to hold the rotor to the wheel bearing, so they do not need to be extremely tight at all. So these basically work as sort of a ratchet. They are directional, so you want to go counterclockwise to loosen. And when we hit the end of this with our hammer, it's going to give it some quick torque to hopefully bust these loose and spin out. Just like that, the easiest ever. Same for this one right here. We make sure it's in the loosened position. Now with our two rotor screws removed, we can just pull this straight off. We've got our old rotor removed. Before we put on our new Rennline rotor, we are gonna just prep the surface a little bit and make sure it's free of debris and grease or any rust that has built up over the years. This will depend on your vehicle, but you do want to make sure this is as clean as possible to avoid any brake vibrations. We'll come in with our metal brush and some brake parts cleaner just to kind of give it a once over and make sure we're all set. We want to just make sure our rotor seats as flat as possible to avoid any issues later down the road. This one appears to be in pretty good shape. We've got our new Rennline OE Sport rotors. See, they are slotted for extra cooling, and they're also Z-coated so that you can prevent corrosion and rust along the outer edge or basically anywhere that the pad does not touch. This is our right side rotor. These are directional, so you'll want to pay attention to that. After the part number here, which is CS132, you'll see R, and that denotes that this is the right side rotor. Now that we have the hub surface clean, ready for our new rotor, we'll get that up there. These do only go on one way to line up with the rotor screws, and those are the unthreaded countersunk holes. These threaded holes are to screw bolts in to get off if the rotors are stuck, so you can just screw bolts in there and kind of just turn it until those are lined up. So we can put our rotor screws back. These, the name of the game is just tight enough to hold the rotor down. You definitely do not want to over tighten them because the next time you do your brakes may not be so fun. Nice and snug. Go back on with our caliper here. We'll take our caliper bolts here with the 10mm hex and thread these in by hand, which is imperative because you can chew up the threads on the knuckle because they're aluminum, something you just always want to be aware of with these. Snug these down, and we will torque these to the factory spec, which is 85 Newton meters. That'll ensure we don't over tighten them and possibly damage the threads on the knuckle. We got our Akabono Euro pads ready to go in. These will just slip right into here and line up with the hole that the pin slides through. We're replacing the hardware too, so we got a fresh spring clip with a pin and cotter pin. So you'll line this up, keep some force on it to compress it a bit. That way you can push the pin through the back side of the caliper all the way through, and it's got to go over the spring clip. That will bottom out. And you can see here the hole that the spring clip sits in is perfectly inside this ear on the caliper. We got a new spring clip here to just press through our pin, and that locks this whole pin into the caliper. There we are, pads are locked in place, all fresh hardware. Now we can work on securing the brake line back and the new wear sensor. Coming here with our 10mm, secure the brake line to the knuckle. This just needs to be tight enough to hold the bracket in place. You don't want to shear it off or strip out the knuckle. Got our fresh brake wear sensor. This will slip into, hear a click. This spring clip also has a cable retainer just to keep everything nice and out of the way. Same deal up here. Push that in until it clicks. It's looking nice. Route around the back. Retainer here. This just clicks together. Plug it in behind the wheel speed sensor. Make sure that's nice and seated. This retaining clip. We'll just hold that in place. Now that we've got the passenger side done, we basically repeat the process over on the driver's side. Now that we're done with the front brakes, let's go ahead and move on to the rear. You can see that the rear calipers and rear brakes are very similar to the front. So we're gonna start again by removing the pad wear sensor. This just seats into the brake pad, pull out like so. It's out of the way. We've got the same wiring retainer here that holds it to the hard line. Just kind of push that to the side to release this locking tab. Holding the sensor to the strut is just this rubber grommet that's pressed into this bracket, and you just need to pull that away like so. Again, just like the front, to undo the actual wiring connection, this clip pops up and swivels upward, and now you can release the electrical connection like so. Now we'll undo this 10mm, holding the bracket with the brake line to the knuckle. That's free, so we can swing the caliper out of the way without bending this hard line. Before we take the caliper off, we need to remove the brake pads. So we'll start by pulling this spring clip on the pin, come in with our 1/4 inch drive punch to push the old pin out. This will also release the spring clip, so we'll just make sure that doesn't fly away on us. Push that in, pull your punch out, finish pulling the pin out. We will need to compress the pistons on the caliper a bit so we can wiggle out the brake pads. So you can just pull, you'll feel the piston compress slightly, and that should loosen up the pad. Enough to pull it out. Same for the inner pad. Now we can undo these two 10mm hex bolts holding the caliper to the knuckle and hang that up out of the way. Got our 10mm hex socket on our 3/8 ratchet. Now our caliper is free, and because we undid this bracket, we can lift everything out of the way. Use a caliper hanger on the spring to keep this nice and situated for us. Now we can move on to removing the rotor. We'll get our trusty impact screwdriver out just like we did for the front. Our rotor came off without having to adjust the e-brake shoes. If you take the rotor screws out and the rotor is hanging up, this is why. You can sneak through one of the lug bolt holes and line it up with this adjuster. And with a flathead screwdriver, you adjust this down until these are compressed enough to where they're not contacting the inside of the rotor. These hubs are also in pretty good shape. We still want to come in with our brush and some brake parts cleaner and just give it a nice once over. Make sure there's no loose debris or anything that can cause our rotor not to sit flat. Wipe away the excess. We'll go ahead and unbox our Rennline OE Sport rear rotors. Just like the fronts, these are directional, so you want to pay attention to that. And these are also Z-coated for added corrosion resistance. Again, if you need to double check which side of the car this rotor is for, after our part number here is an L, and that's going to denote left or the driver's side of the vehicle. Here's our right side rotor. Now that we've got our hub cleaned up, we're ready for our new rotor. Line these holes up for the rotor screws. Again, these are just to hold the rotor in place, so these just need to be snugged. Next, we'll compress the pistons in the caliper using our Schwaben piston compressor tool. This essentially acts as a ratchet and spreads these two brackets at the same time. And this works really well on calipers like this, like 4-piston or 6-piston caliper. These are a little bit big and they interfere with the inside here, but we can still get these in enough and line these up with all 4 pistons, and we should be able to compress these. Now we've got our caliper pistons compressed fully. We can go ahead and put the caliper back on the rotor and install our new pads, hardware, and pad wear sensor. One thing I do want to note, you can reuse the hardware here since there's not a torque to yield fastener. If they look in good enough shape, you can reuse them. Just be sure to clean them up and torque them down to 85 Newton meters. You want to make sure to hand thread. These can become an issue if you're changing pads frequently or pulling the caliper off on the side of the track over and over again. It is possible to cross thread or pull the threads out of the aluminum knuckle. So you always want to have that in the back of your mind when you're taking the caliper on and off. We've got our 10mm hex on our torque wrench set to 85 Newton meters. We'll come back in with our 10mm bolt to reattach the brake line bracket. Don't want to over torque these. Now we can install our new pads. These should just slip right in. Now that we have our new pads in, it's time to put our new spring clip in as well as our new pin. You want to make sure this is on the bottom or closest to the ground, and this is where we route our brake pad sensor wire through. So just be careful of the orientation when everything goes back together. First, you want to put the spring clip in, and we will have to compress it slightly so we can slide our drive pin through. The orientation on this pin also matters. The little spring clip that holds it in place should be on this side of the caliper through the inner brake pad. That will bottom out. And you can see here the hole that the spring clip sits in is perfectly inside this ear on the caliper. We get a new spring clip here to just press through our pin, and that locks this whole pin into the caliper. We're going to install our new brake pad wear sensor. These just press in on the slots on the brake pad. You can see there's 2 locking clips that hold it in place. There's one for each pad. We'll put this wire through the retaining clip right here, come back around and install the second part of the sensor in the inner pad, that into place. The caliper has a built-in retainer for the rest of the wear sensor. We'll feed our new wear sensor into this little clip that holds it next to the hard brake line. It keeps everything nice and tidy and stops the sensor from rubbing on the brake line, which would wear through the sensor maybe and cause the brake light on the dash. It just sits in there and clips together. We'll clip this grommet into the back of the strut. Now we can just repeat the process over on the other side of the car. Now that we have all the brakes replaced, I'm gonna give myself a visual reminder here before we back out with the car to pump the brakes, because we did compress all of the brake pistons. You will need to pump the brakes a couple of times so that they seat against the pads and actually stop the car. So if you want to save your garage door, throw this over to remind yourself when you get in the car to pump the brakes. Before we wrap up this video, there are a couple things to go over. Since you may or may not have had to move your e-brake adjuster, you do want to adjust that to make sure your e-brake's working properly. And you also want to bed in the new brake pads. The best way to bed in the pads is to do a couple hard stops from maybe 40 miles an hour down to 20, but never come to a complete stop, because when the brakes are heated up, you're just basically embedding pad material, and that could affect brake noise, brake performance later on down the road. Once you have everything checked off, you want to just check your brake fluid level. Sometimes people will overfill their brake fluid reservoir because they see the levels low, but that's actually because the pads are so worn and the pistons are pushed all the way out. So just give that a check. You want to check the adjustment on your e-brake. You want to properly bed in the pads and make sure you pump up the brakes before you pull the car out. Now you know how to change the brakes in your 986 Boxster. If you want to see any more videos or learn more about working on your Porsche, head over to pelicanparts.com.